Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Saida Kisai Zehra. I'm Program Officer and Research Associate at South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. Today Minorities' Right Day is celebrated across the world. So on the behalf of today's webinar, we are going to discuss the violence against minority in South Asian perspective. So with that, we have very amazing speakers from all over South Asia. Dr. Monas Emmer from Pakistan, Dr. Sir Disha Priya Vijayatunge, Mr. Imad Mohammed from Maldives, and Mohammad Asif Khan from India. Welcome you all. The keynote speakers of today's webinar, Professor Dr. Munal Emmer, former Professor, Chairman, Department of International Relations, Dean Faculty of Social Sciences, Karachi University, Pakistan. Over to you, sir.
South Asia Research for Religious Minorities, SARIM. So that is, I think, a forum which is quite important and significant in prevailing circumstances. The keynote address, the theme is basically about religious minorities in South Asia and how religious minorities in South Asia, whether these minorities are Christians or Hindus or Muslims and Sikhs and Buddhists and whosoever they are, that they are so vulnerable as far as violence is concerned, discrimination is concerned, hatred is concerned. So that is something which I will talk about, how to deal with the violence against minorities in South Asia, because there are millions and millions of religious minorities. The first thing which I would like to mention here is, and that is something which the audience should also take into account, that is about an approach based on inclusiveness, not exclusiveness. So, religious inclusiveness, ethnic inclusiveness, lingual inclusiveness, that those people who tend to be different in terms of their race, in terms of their religion, in terms of the culture and language, they should not be excluded as far as the minority and majority thing is concerned. So, how the society can be inclusive, that's a big challenge for South Asia. And that is something which we need to bear in mind, that an approach which the governments of South Asia, the civil society in South Asia needs to pursue is inclusiveness. The second thing is basically which I would like to talk about, and it deals with a very dangerous situation which is prevailing in South Asia, and that has to do with intolerance, more and more intolerance, chauvinism, xenophobia, targeting people who are religious minorities. So that is the wave of intolerance in South Asia. That is nothing new. It's all over the world. You look at Europe. You look at Africa. You look at Asia and Americas and all such continents. So you see a surge of intolerance, extremism, militancy, radicalization, violence, and then terrorism. But the root cause is primarily intolerance. It starts with intolerance, that people they tend to be intolerant as far as each other concerned. So we have to do something about intolerance. That this it's a disease. It's something. It's a virus which is permeated, particularly in almost all these South Asian countries, stretching from Bhutan to Maldives, from Afghanistan to Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. All these South Asian countries are vulnerable as far as intolerance is concerned, and that is the second thing which I would like to talk about. The third thing is that there's a report which has been published by South Asia State of Minorities. It's basically based in Kathmandu, South Asian Collective, and the report 2020. And that report gives a very, unique picture as far as the state of religious minorities in South Asia concerned. It has discussed, that report has discussed each and each country, every country in South Asia, in great detail. And some of the things which we have to basically bear in mind if we go through the report of South Asia State of Minorities based in Kathmandu, the report was published in Kathmandu 2020, that there are basically 5 issues which are important when we talk about religious minorities. And religious minorities primarily are not only in Pakistan or in India or in Bangladesh, these minorities are everywhere in all the South Asian countries. So the first is primarily hate speech, that people, groups, political parties, political groups, religious schools, and you can name it, the manner in which hate speech has become a phenomena to create hatred against each other on the basis of religion, on the basis of sect. And I think we have to understand, we have to bear in mind that religion is like a time bomb, like ethnicity is like a time bomb. The feelings of people can be easily mobilized, people can be easily charged if hate speech or hate speeches are delivered against a particular religious group or a particular sect. So, this is one thing. The second is that when there are discriminatory practices, that how discrimination becomes a part of policy. Religious discrimination, lingual discrimination, cultural discrimination, ethnic discrimination, sectarian discrimination. So one has to understand that it is true that the human mind tends to be extremist, the human mind tends to be intolerant and violent, and discrimination is basically rooted as far as the human mind is concerned. But if the society is peaceful, the society is tolerant, the society is democratic, egalitarian, enlightened, then certainly discrimination cannot penetrate. Discrimination cannot take its roots in that particular society. Then, of course, threats and intimidation. How threats and a policy of intimidation against a particular religious group. And there's a history to it, which I will talk about later on. And finally, you have physical violence. It all starts with the level of extremism and intolerance. Then it goes to radicalization, militancy, and then, of course, violence, and then terrorism. So, physical violence, when one religious group or ethnic group is targeted, people are killed, people are, maltreated, and then it leads to the refugees. That how the what happened in case of say Myanmar, that how hundreds and thousands of Muslims from Myanmar, from the Rakhine state, there was a policy of genocide which was basically perpetrated by the government of Myanmar, by the military of Myanmar, and that genocide, it led to the exodus of almost 1 million Rohingyas, the Burmese Muslims or the Myanmar Muslims from the Rakhine state to Bangladesh. So it's a very recent example of religious violence, physical violence, religious discrimination based on religion. And there are many, many other examples which we can take note of as far as South Asia is concerned. Now, perhaps we have to live with the issue of religious violence. Absolutely, there is no doubt about it. But what is possible is basically to reduce the level of religious violence or the level of discrimination and the threats and the physical violence against a particular religious community. Because if that religious community is so vulnerable that it cannot protect itself as far as the majority is concerned, so the minority is vulnerable from the majority. What is the way out? How can there be in South Asia an environment of peaceful coexistence, an environment of tolerance, an environment whereby people who are of different faiths of different religions, of different sect, of different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, they can live peacefully. It's a big issue because as days are passing in this world, we see the resources, that how the resources are diminishing day by day, food resources, energy resources, then we have employment issue. So more and more economic problems, more leads to social problems, social issues, and that causes unrest in society. So in South Asia, particularly, it's very old. It's an old region. Thousands of years of civilization in South Asia. Absolutely. The question is that such rich cultures and rich civilizations, how can people, experience violence and this hatred and discrimination and destruction of property and threats and intimidation? So this is something which is very sad, that South Asia, which is a hub of several cultures and civilizations, that's one region which is so much vulnerable as far as religious this instability, the factors are concerned. So the way out, what's the way out? In my keynote address, basically, I have to be very clear about some of the things. The first is that the governments of South Asia, the state actors in South Asia, they must be mindful the fact that unless there is rule of law, unless there is justice system, the minorities in South Asia would continue to feel vulnerable as far as religious violence, religious persecution, such things are concerned. So rule of law is very important. Justice system, that those people, whether they are in any South Asian country, like for example, in case of India, that how the Citizen Amendment Act, how the National Registration Act, how the religious minorities in the regions largest and the biggest country, India, which tends to be secular in nature, and that secular or democratic country is primarily a victim of religious assertion of the majority. So that is something which we have to understand, that uh, the vulnerability, particularly of the Muslim and the Christian and the Sikh and the Dalit communities in India, that is something which is a big challenge as it destabilizes that country. Likewise, there are many other examples in South Asia, like in Sri Lanka, in the this pandemic, the controversy that those Muslims who have lost their lives because of pandemic, their bodies have been burned. So that is something which has enraged Muslims of Sri Lanka, and not only Sri Lanka but elsewhere also, to the extent that Maldives has offered the government of Sri Lanka to bury the bodies of those Sri Lankan Muslims who have died of COVID-19. Instead, that they should be burned. Their bodies should be burned. And recently, they burned a body of a child, a Muslim child in Sri Lanka. That is something which tends to be very inhuman. In Pakistan, certainly there are many issues faced by various religious minorities, but certainly we have to understand that those Hindus from the province of Sindh who migrated to India for better life, they are returning to Pakistan because they have um, realized that in Pakistan, comparatively, there is a more religious tolerance as compared to India. But certainly in Pakistan, we have a long way to go in order to assure, as far as inclusiveness is concerned, as far as non-discriminatory, attitude and policies against various religious minorities concerned. Therefore, we have to basically understand that in constitution, the constitutions of South Asian countries, there must be strict laws which should protect the rights of minorities. And laws should not only be laws should also be implemented. There are various laws, rules, and regulations. But the thing is basically that when there is a religious violence, as it happened in case of India recently, when the Indian Muslims, they in Delhi uh, early this year, they launched a protest, and then there was a stage, demonstration, things like that. How force was used to disperse them. Uh, the lynching of Muslims, Indian Muslims, uh, the allegations of cause slaughter and things like that. So basically, this thing has put a question mark as far as religious tolerance in South Asia is concerned. And then there has to be, a zero tolerance for intolerance. Absolutely, there is no doubt about it. That and for that matter, the youths of South Asia, I mean, particularly those the school-going children, the syllabi, the subjects which they study, such subjects there has to be a focus. There has to be an emphasis in such subjects which are taught in schools in South Asia, primary level, secondary level, how they should be taught about the merit and the essentiality and the necessity as far as religious tolerance is concerned. Because at the grassroots level, if there is intolerance, if those who are going to various education institutions, they are not properly trained about accepting other faiths, about accepting others who are religiously different. So there has to be in the educational system of South Asia a major change is required, a qualitative change is required. That the subjects must be introduced, which should basically uh, argue for, which should advocate as far as religious tolerance is concerned, religious peace is concerned, because all the religions, whether it's Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism or Christianity or Judaism, these religions call for peace and tolerance and sanity. But the problem is basically that those who are the followers of such religions, they are the ones who violate the basic principles of the religions. Like if there is Hindu nationalism or the Muslim nationalism or Buddhist nationalism or any other nationalism or religious grounds, that basically negates as far as the basic principle of religious tolerance is concerned. And there has to be a political will and determination among the uh, countries of South Asia, the governments of South Asia, the civil society. The media must play a very important role because it's the media which is held responsible for escalating religious tension because of its vested interests. So media, unless media is responsible, particularly electronic media, in discouraging reports and events which create a hype, which create tension, which results into violence, it will be very difficult to control. I mean, I think media has a greater responsibility along with political parties and political groups, the bureaucracy, the judiciary, the civil society. So it's a big challenge which the South Asian countries are facing these days. That how to transform their cultures, which the last couple of decades are a victim of violence and extremism and intolerance and radicalization. And finally, I would like to mention here that around 40% of the 40 to 45% of the youths of South Asia, 45% of the population of South Asia is composed of youths. They are the ones they are the ones whose future is at stake. if the countries remain vulnerable to religious persecution, ethnic persecution. So the youths of South Asia must not be polarized. The youth of South Asia, and there has to be investment as far as providing them with better education, better quality of life, in terms of human security. Because unless the youths are properly trained, unless the youths are secure, they will continue to be used by various vested interest groups, as several, religious extremist groups and parties, political parties in South Asia have been doing, that they are using the youths of for their own purpose. So therefore, I would end here with a note that, according to Chairman Mao, the founder of modern China, the People's Republic of China, his famous quotation that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So we have to take the first step in order to be practical in terms of religious tolerance, peaceful coexistence, in order to make sure that there is rule of law, that there is no discrimination, that there are laws in almost all the South Asian countries prohibiting religious discrimination, but then such laws are not to be implemented. The role of law enforcement agencies, that's very important, that they should be neutral. They should not take sides in case of a religious, this demonstration or a protest or whatever it is. They have to be neutral, and their main purpose should be to maintain the rule of law. So I think, as days are passing, all over the world, we see the surge of ethnic and religious intolerance and extremism, and the ultra right wing, the culture of populism. That the populism, which is basically, ultra right wing type of a phenomena, which has gripped the majority of the Western countries. The culture of populism, whether it is in the United States, in the form of the white supremacists, or the right wing Republican Party, or in France, the National Party in France, and in Britain, in Scandinavian countries, in Austria, in Greece, the new Golden Dawn, this party in Italy. So we in South Asia, since we are the custodians of rich culture and civilization, so we must be very mindful with the fact that we have to put our own house in order, and we have to make sure that each and every life of the people, it's precious. They are first human beings. Sense of humanity is the essence. Thank you very much.
Point to be noted, sir. Thank you for raising the awareness. Now move to our second speaker, Dr. Sardisha Priya S. Vijayatunge, Ambassador of Peace, Director General, Sunfolk Global Federation from Sri Lanka. We are glad to have you, sir. May you proceed now.
Thank you. The chairman and officials of South Asia Research Institute of Migrants, distinguished speakers of this dialogue, and all delegates across the South Asia and the world. So greetings from Sri Lanka. It is my pleasure and honor to share a few thoughts briefly relevant to the topic, with especially focus to present COVID-19 pandemic that is severely affected to the whole world and very seriously to the South Asia region, which represents the world's largest poverty affected people in the world. I wish to just share about my thoughts who are minorities at first. Even though we do not have clear international agreed definition as to which groups constitute minorities, in practice, minorities are ethnic, religious, or linguistic groups living among a majority group in considerable and justified fear of persecution. It is often stressed that the existence of minority is a question of fact and that any definition must include both objective factors, such as the existence of a shared ethnicity, language, or religion, and also the subjective factors, including that individual must identify themselves as members of a minority. Example is Muslims and Christians in India, Buddhists in Bangladesh, Tamils in Sri Lanka, or indigenous people in all South Asian nations, so on we can define. All South Asian countries have one or more minority groups within their national territories characterized by their own national, ethnic, linguistic, or religious identity, which differs from that of the majority population in the country. The term minorities used in the United Nations human rights system usually refers to national law, ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities pursuant to the United Nations Minorities Declaration adopted by consensus in 1992. So let me go to the topic with relevance to the present situation. The violence against minorities in South Asia, especially focused to impact on COVID-19, how it affects for minorities. At present, COVID-19 pandemic poses a huge challenge to the world as well as whole South Asia. The impact on minorities can be more severe in a number of ways and for a variety of reasons. Experiences differ certainly between minorities, communities, and in different contexts. But there are a number of areas of concern that have quickly emerged as particularly relevant for minorities in South Asia. COVID-19 environment can be more challenging for members of minority communities. Information on how to prevent and address COVID-19 and on availability of health services, economic and social relief can be more difficult to access as it is often not readily available in languages used by them. Minority women in particular face compound hardships during the COVID-19 crisis, given the intersecting burdens they face due to gender discrimination and inequality. Stigmatization and an increase in acts of incitement to hated or minority communities have been heard, with minorities sometimes being cast as scapegoats for their virus. As a telling example of how unfounded these claims are, which groups is considered responsible for the virus varies from places to place, with whoever is marginalized, socially disfavored, or excluded being targeted. Some occasions, members of minority communities are subjected hate speech and violence accordingly. Funeral rites and religious practices are subjected to suppress due to pandemic. Therefore, not only family members and associates of dead persons, but also whole communities at large are in severe pain of mind due to this situation, especially and that's the funerals, how the dead bodies are cremation. Political and religious leaders should refrain from incitement, but also that they have a crucial role to play in speaking out firmly and promptly against intolerance stereotyping and instances of hate speech. The action of inaction, the actions, yes, or inactions can have a lasting impact on efforts to ensure that the pandemic does not deepen inequalities and discrimination. No one shouldn't be denied health care because of stigma or because they belong to a group that is marginalized as minorities. It's important to share information with communities, including in relevant minority languages, about testing, protection, and health responses. Should they develop health conditions related to COVID-19? Additional socio-economic measures required in COVID-19 health crisis. Minorities may suffer as they are poor social and economic status. Therefore, emergency financial aid to those minorities working in the informal economy required from the authorities. Strengthening the participation and inclusion of minorities in efforts to prevent and combat COVID-19, promote respect for diversity and human dignity, and prevent and combat human rights violations. Ensure inclusive dialogue that will help ensure that minority communities implement and adhere to required public health measures voluntarily, including by analyzing how cultural and religious practices may be adapted in responses to COVID-19 extremely important. Let us have a violence-free South Asia for minorities during the COVID-19 pandemic era and further. In the path of SDG Agenda 2030 in action, decade 21 to 2030, coming 10 years. Let us work for eliminate totally all forms of violences against minorities in South Asia as well as in the whole world. So finally, let me wish Merry Christmas and Happy New Year 2021 for all of you with the new hope for the future. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you so much. On third, I would like to invite Mr. Imad Mohammed from Maldives. He is Executive Director, Huadu 8 and Vice President and Maldives NGO Federation.
Thank you. Thank you, organizer. Assalamu alaikum and very good evening. It is my pleasure to be here today as a panelist to outline the violence against minorities in South Asia, but I will focus on the Maldivian context. The population of Maldives belongs to almost entirely to the Maldivian ethnic group, which is the result of various people settings in the island successively through the country's history. The Maldives constitution designates Sunni Islam as the state religion. Only Sunni Muslims are allowed to hold the citizenship in the country. Citizens may practice Sunni Islam only, and there is no official or religious minority groups in the Maldives. However, we are living with many expatriates from different ethnic groups, cultures, and from different religions. Maldives immigration reported approximately 200,000 legal foreign workers, with an additional estimate of 63,000 undocumented foreign workers. Most of them are from Bangladesh and from other South Asian countries. There are several cases of violence against expatriate workers, especially people from the Bangladesh who worked as the laborers. Reported cases include physical violence, harassment, and making them to work overtime without paying them, and even kidnapping cases were reported. Maldives law prohibited same-sex sexual contact. Under the penal code, the punishment includes imprisonment up to 80 years and as well as provision for supplementary punishment of 100 lashes imposed under Maldivian Islamic law. None of the legal provision prohibiting the discrimination covers discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. So no organization focused on LGBTI problems in the country. Violence against, for example, Yamin Rashid, a prominent blogger and social media activist, was killed because Islamic extreme groups believed he mocked the Islam. Rashid has received before his disappearance, which were even reported to the police, but no action were taken, and police failed to protect him. There are increase in online death threats and attacks against the citizens perceived to be crucial of Islamic extreme views and Islam. The journalist who went missing in the Maldives 5 years ago was killed by local affiliate of Al Qaeda. Investors found that there are hardline groups' existence and effort to silence liberal voices in the Maldives. Dr. Afrashim Ali, Islamic scholar who advocated for practice of moderate Islam, was snapped and killed near his residence in 2012. We have seen few reports on attacking foreign tourists in the country by the extreme Islamic extremist groups, and the issue is getting increased over the years. Maldives guarantee Maldives Constitution guarantees to all persons the same rights and freedom and upholds principle of equality and non-discrimination. However, Maldives today grapples with a structural form of gender inequalities. A byproduct of this is the prevalence of domestic violence. According to data collected by the UN in 2017, 56% of women ranging from age of 15 to 40 in the last 12 months. Violence and violence against women is a critical issue, and even it is getting increased due to the Islamic extremism. In Maldives, the adults often force against children in the home or at the classroom. Across the country, 15% of the adolescents have been sexually abused at least once, with rates among girls double for the rates among the boys. Persons with disabilities face considerable challenges in the Maldives in achieving most of their rights, including health, education, and employment. Major institutions and systems in the country have only started modifying the services provision to cater to the disability community very recently. Violence against the people with disability must not be forgotten, and it needs to be addressed carefully in the Maldives. I would also want to highlight the issues facing in the Sri Lanka today. Sri Lankan government in March announced it will cremate the bodies of all the people who died of COVID-19, saying the coronavirus could contaminate underground water. Government is discussing how to provide the human response to request for neighboring to allow burial for Muslims who died in COVID-19. Sri Lankan Muslims have argued the government to allow it, cutting their religious beliefs. They accuse their government of denying the Muslim basic rights without scientific ground. Since many countries in the world allow the burials, Sri Lankan government must respect Muslim minorities there. Before I conclude, I would like to thank organizer for giving me the opportunity to be here today. I also thank panelists for their very informative presentations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for useful awareness and knowledge, sir. Going to our next speaker, who is an Indian Muslim activist and highlighting mob lynching and hate crimes in India, Muhammad Asif Khan from India. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out the time for second time. I appreciate your continuing interest.
Thank you, organizer, and greeting to all the speakers. The topic is that violence against minorities in South Asian countries. So today, few hours ago, I was reading a report, South Asia State of Minority 2020, which says that India is most dangerous and violent place for Muslims. And one report says that I was reading another newspaper which says that the condition of India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka is equal when it comes to treatment to their respective minorities. So, first of all, what is the root cause of violence against minorities, whether it's a religious minority, linguistic minorities, ethnic minorities, or sexual minorities? The root cause is it lies in mentality of the majority. There is a saying that Holocaust does not start with gas chamber; it always starts with hate speech. So we need to understand root cause of the problem. The root cause is discrimination, or the kind of mentality which majority people have, whether in India or Pakistan. Because in a society, I am a Muslim in India, so I'm a minority. So I know what kind of challenge as a minority we face from majority community. Majority community who have all kind of privilege in their own country, in their own society, they always think it is okay to demonize oppressed people. It is okay to criticize their thing. They have different kind of misconception. So this start from their house. There are several cases in India when school children, students who were studying fifth grade or sixth grade or middle school, Muslim students were hounded by Hindu children, and they were called Pakistani. They were called anti-national. So the question is, how did they learn it? A children who is 10-year-old, 11-year-old, how did they learn such kind of language that you need to call a Muslim, Indian Muslim, a Pakistani, you need to call them anti-national? So they learn it from their society, their house. Their parents talk such kind of language. Whenever they switch on their television, the media person talks such kind of language. So they start from there. When they go to school, they have their own social circle. So same thing goes there as well. And when they grew up, when they go to college, and when they join a company, whatever office for job, they get same kind of atmosphere, and it only escalate. It doesn't happen overnight. Like right now, India has facing so many problems regarding minority issues since 2014, when Narendra Modi became Prime Minister of India. But it doesn't happen overnight. It is a slow process, and it takes decades. It takes so many years to reach at that level. Physical violence. First of all, we need to understand how our society works. Our society, or those people who are poor or oppressed, like for example, if we talk about gender equality, then society have different rule for men, different rule for women, different rule for LGBT community. If we talk about religious minority or majority, then India have different rule for society, have different rule for Hindu, and different parameter for Muslim. In Pakistan, a Sunni Muslim will be treated differently, but a Christian or Shia or Hindu will be treated differently. So we need to understand this, and we need to reform our society first. You cannot stop violence if you do not reform your society, because society has turned into violent zombies. Like in India, especially, when society and government both support violence, there are two types of violence generally. If some individual do against someone, then your law can protect you, your law enforcement agency or your government can protect you. But imagine the situation if government itself supporting the violence against you. What will happen in that case? That's happening in India or in Sri Lanka or in Myanmar. Myanmar is a live example. What happened there? And so how does it, how we reach at that situation when even government is refusing to protect us and government is supporting the violence against us? It happens because of society. For example, in Myanmar, I'm giving you example of Myanmar. The process of genocide started much many years ago. Myanmar has passed a citizenship law in 1981, I think. At that time, they said that anyone who failed to prove their ancestors' citizenship beyond 1827 will be stateless person in Myanmar. Actually, it was just a planning to target Rohingya Muslims at that time, because they were accused of being a foreigner or invader or some that kind of genocidal vocabulary were being used against them. So at that time, 1981, Myanmar had passed their citizenship law, and since then, Rohingya were living in their own land as stateless people, and the degree of violence has escalated day by day, month by month, year by year, and in the end, approximate 1 million Rohingyas has to migrate from their own country, their own land. So this is how it starts. There is the same case in India as well. Before 2014, when Narendra Modi was not prime minister, the so-called secular government was ruling India. There were discrimination in the society. It's not like that it was a heaven before 2014. There was definitely discrimination, but it was on different level. At that time, nobody noticed, because that was a subtle discrimination when you were using dog whistles or gaslighting problem of Muslims, and it was not physical violence, but discrimination was still in the society. There were many innocent Muslims who have been framed in fake terror cases, and draconian laws like anti-terror law, national security act were invoked against them. Before 2014, there were many cases where Muslims, Muslim youth have been arrested. They were arrested by law enforcement agencies in the name of terror cases, and then they had to spend 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, and then in the end, Supreme Court or High Court had to acquit them of all charges. So this process starts from there. When something, when supposed to be a minority, if a majority person committed any kind of crime, imagine the language of society, language of media, language of law enforcement. They don't highlight the issue the way they should have. But when a minority person commit a crime, imagine you read, you notice the language of your media, especially in India. I can say that the kind of language they use, it like it's just a genocidal language. They use the vocabulary. Recently, when the COVID pandemic, the Indian government and the supporter of Indian government has blamed Indian Muslims or Tablighi Jamaat for pandemic. So the Indian media, Hindi or English, they were using provocative terminology, like they were calling Corona Jihad, Indian media and their supporters. So so this is not the first time when they are using such kind of language. They have been using it since decades. We never noticed. And the same thing happened in any other country. Like if we read the history of America, we know how black people were treated there. They were slave, and how their police or their media always treated them. The same thing happened with Jews in Nazi Germany. We know how Tamil were treated in Sri Lanka. They have faced a genocide there. Recently, Muslim and Christian have been facing the same thing. We know how Shias and Ahmadi faces violence in Pakistan. So the problem is the society. And as far as I concern, to reform the society is not responsibility of minority. We are not in power to reform the society. We are fighting, we have our own battle, we are fighting our own problem. It is the responsibility of the majority to reform their own society. Like if I am a man, so by gender I am privileged person. So it is my responsibility to teach my kids, to my family member, how to respect women. I will teach my son that how to respect a woman. It is not onus on a woman to teach the how to respect. They are already vulnerable. Like I am a Muslim, I cannot reform 80% Hindus of India. I am a victim here. It is the responsibility of those Hindus who proclaim to be secular and progressive. It is their responsibility to reform their own society. Same goes with the Muslims in Pakistan. I have seen a few Hindu activists from Pakistan. They always talk about the plight of their community in Pakistan, like forced conversion of Hindu girls and forced marriage, etc., etc. So I often read comments on Twitter. So Pakistani Muslims comments beneath their tweets. Why do you always talk about your own community? Why do you always talk about Hindus? Why don't you talk about Muslim? Why don't you talk about Indian Muslim? And when I talk, when I write about Indian Muslim issues, Indian Hindus write same stuff under my tweet as well. They write, why do you always talk about Muslim issues? Why don't you speak for Hindus? Why don't you speak for Pakistani Hindus? They do not understand that majority always have a support of society. They always have support of state. The media is in their hand, police is theirs, entire government is there. We do not have anyone. That's why we are narrating our own story. We do not have media. There is no single media house in India which is run by Muslim or owned by Muslim. Each and every media house, their editor in chief belong to upper caste Hindi community. So if they do not belong to our community, how would they understand our pain? So it is their responsibility. Those people who are progressive, those who want to see peace in the society, it is their responsibility to reform their own society. For example, when last year, when India has stripped special status of Kashmir, 5 August 2019, Article 370 was abrogated. At that time, I was thinking many liberal, the so-called secular or liberal, will oppose Narendra Modi government decision. It was surprising for me that many people have supported Narendra Modi government over Kashmir issue. They did not support Kashmiris at that time. Why? Because it, this prove one thing, that their society, any society where they were born or they brought up, they were nurtured in a different mindset with different narrative, and that's how they do not understand pain of Kashmiris. The same goes with the Pakistani Muslim as well. If we will talk about minority, they will not understand. They will say, okay, few incident happens. They are isolated incident. Those incidents do not represent Pakistan. Sri Lankan. So I was saying that whether it's India or Pakistan or Sri Lanka, the education system and the society need to be reformed. Why government, whether it's a current Sri Lankan government or Indian government or any government which is right wing, why they successful in their agenda? Because society support them. They know society will support them. And why society is doing so? Because society have an agenda, a bad mentality. They were nurtured. They were nurtured with a certain kind of narrative. They have learned certain kind of things in childhood, in their school, through their movies, in their media, whenever they talk in their friend circle. Nowadays, if you read Indian WhatsApp or Facebook or Twitter, any kind of social media platform is full of hateful speech. We need to change our education system. I don't know what they teach in other country. As far as what I learned in my own country, we just we just were taught about some basic mathematics, science, history, but there was nothing about equality. We do not teach our kids about political justice, social justice. So we need to teach them since their childhood. Whatever happened to our generation or our elder generation, I think we cannot redo it. But from next generation, it's our responsibility to teach them about equality, humanity, and it is very important to introduce our children to each and every section of the society. When we keep them isolate, we do not teach them other things, then they will be nurtured in different atmosphere, and the process of otherization start from there. So we need to teach them since their childhood. If they are learning hatred and they are having prejudices since their childhood, then it is our responsibility to teach them love and sympathy, empathy since their childhood. One more important thing, like who can narrate a story of their own society very well? I believe it is the victim who can narrate the story. If you want to talk about the situation of Indian Muslim, I can say anything because I am a Muslim. I have faced it. We do not have our own channels, or the Indian media is already biased. So that's why we are using social media platform to narrate our story. Many people outside India never heard what's going on inside. Even forget about foreigner. Few years ago, when I was not associated to social media, I didn't know what's going on in Kashmir. Whatever I learned about Kashmir is through Indian media, and we know how media works nowadays. So this, so how did I came to know about the Kashmir? Because I talked to a Kashmiri. I have many friends in Kashmir. Spoke to them. They told me what is the reality, and that's how I learned about Kashmir issues. So those people who are majority and in their own country or in their own society, they really need to take responsibility to reform their own society, and we need more inclusive society. We don't need to otherize people. No one can be a rational person if he has prejudices in his mind, and if so, I hope I am successful or able to deliver what I am trying to say. That our noted speakers and our audience will realize what I'm trying to say. I hope those people who are privileged in their own society and their own country will understand it, and they will try to work together on these things, like how to reform their own society, and how to how to reform their own education system. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the detailed explanation. I would like to invite the director of SAREM, Dr. Khurram Mehdi. I would like to hear your thoughts. Over to you.
Thank you, Kisa. Well, the situation of religious minorities in South Asia continues to be extremely challenging, and even the internal security laws and anti-terror laws are being used against communities. Here I quote the example of India, the Prevention of Terrorism Act. It has been used to detain Muslims unlawfully, and the police has become communalized and are biased against the religious minority communities. A brief overview of the situation of religious minorities in South Asia reveals the complexity and the diversity in the identity of religious minorities. However, these minorities have issues in common too. Many are subject to severe physical, political, social, economic, and cultural oppression and violation of human rights within their community, by their nation states. So national governments should take swift action to tackle rising terrorism and violence, ensuring impartial investigations and the prosecution of those responsible for attacks against religious minorities in order to end the culture of impunity around these crimes. And they should ensure, the national government should ensure that the COVID-19 pandemic does not result in long-term curtailment of civic space in any way. Moreover, the international communities should also ensure greater attention by the United Nations and other international entities on civil and political rights violation in South Asia. In addition, they should facilitate the development of South Asian regional initiatives and mechanism to address various forms of restrictions of civic space in the region. Civil society or minority groups should foster greater regional civil society initiatives to push back against restriction by national entities. And they should enable channels for greater solidarity across borders and expression of support for victims of targeting in individual countries. Moreover, they should facilitate and participate in greater sharing and learning between various groups across borders. In the end, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to our speakers, Professor Dr. Monis Ahmed, Dr. Sir Disha Priya S. Vijayatunge, Mr. Imad Muhammad, and Muhammad Asif Khan. This webinar provided us with a deeper understanding of the issues at stake and will be instrumental in influencing our current and future work in the region. Thank you.
So let me conclude by thanking you all for your time and valuable insight. Indeed, you are shaping an important dialogue and putting tools and offer making a better place for minorities in South Asia. We look forward to welcome you again. Wish you a very happy and safe Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Goodbye, all of you.